All right, so I'm fairly obsessed with flashlights, and I have a whole bunch of them. And I've always felt like there was eventually going to come a time where being able to produce a light is going to be very important. Whether it be a power outage, emergency situation, whatever you want to call it, you're bound to need a flashlight. But I've always also felt that there were times where you need more of a lantern or a long term emergency light situation where you just don't really want to be using your flashlight because that might be something you need to use for other things. So I've always thought having little nifty type lights that you can recharge, have good runtime, um, and put out decent little bit of light were always nifty. And obviously, little things like jewel thieves have always been good for that. But as far as actually getting more usable light, um, I feel like something like this right here is a good thing to make. If you're like me, you have a lot of 18650 batteries and you got a lot of extra circuits laying around. These are pretty easy to make. And I've made a habit of accumulating a lot of different little charge circuits. A lot of these are from pretty much things that use lithium cells that are normally charged to 4.2 volts. So here's an example of a little charger that came with a little e-cigarette. So this would plug into a port and it would charge a little tiny lithium cell. And it would charge it to about 4.2 volts and then it would shut off the charge. A little green light would come on. You're good to go. But these circuits can also be used, from my experience, for pretty much any cell that is a lithium ion 4.2 volt cell, like an 18650. So I can charge this big guy right here with this little charger, no problem. Likewise, here's another charger. See, this one's actually already soldered to the battery. It was in another circuit. Um, so I'm going to use this for something else, but it's just yet another variation of a charged circuit. It'll shut off at 4.5 or 4.2 volts. Um, so in here it's the same thing. I just got this from another random board. I just know it used this kind of cell, so I know I can charge it with that. So this is just a simple setup. I've got an 18650 cell in there. I've got a potentiometer that's running through, and I've got it hooked up to this charge circuit, and this is the little input for it right there. Um, so I basically just threw a power LED on here, and this is actually a Cree XBD. It's a crappy old emitter I got from somewhere, but it's better than your old average 3 millimeter, 5 millimeter LED like what's on this guy. So with that, what I decided was I would not put a power switch on there. I would run it through a resistance and just turn it up very high. This is probably maybe 100K ohms right there. So you can see with the resistance all the way up, I still get a tiny little bit of light out of it, and it doesn't actually become really usable until I cut it down. But being that there's no on switch, that light is always going to come out of there. And I always thought that was kind of useful because if you're in a situation where it's pitch black, then you're always going to be able to find it in the dark because it's emitting a faint glow. At the same time, that is actually drawing so little energy that I let it, before I actually put this charge circuit in there, I just let it run with the battery in there by itself like that. And from a 4.2 volt charge, about a couple weeks in, this thing was only down to about 4.08 volts. So that's a very, very parasitic draw, I guess if you want to call it. So this thing really doesn't need to be charged that much. But I'm just going to go ahead and put the case back on real quick. Alright, so we got this case back on. And you can see it's pretty much just a little plastic project enclosure I got from a Radio Shack. Thought it was a pretty good fit. Had to tear it up a little bit just to make everything fit. But ultimately, very simple, usable thing. You just have your lithium cell in there, 18650, straight to the LED through a potentiometer, a very high resistance, about 100K or more, I would recommend. And then directly to the battery, I've got a little charge circuit in there. And powering the charge circuit, I'm running off this little USB cable here. So I can either just plug it straight into the computer, or I've got actually a little extension USB cord I can run out and just hook that in and charge that. But when it's done charging, the LED in there, I guess I can't really see. I would imagine if it's pitch black, I'll be able to see what's going on through this little open hole right here. But it'll shut off on its own when it's done charging. You don't have to worry about your battery exploding or anything. And then you got a little guy right here that is always on. You'll be able to find in the dark and for practically no cost. Then when you need to, you just crank it up and you got yourself really usable emergency light, or even a work light, whatever you want to call it. But that'll run for a really long time. And I actually got lucky with this particular LED. I would ordinarily add a resistor in line with that. Maybe something like this right here, a little ceramic guy. And just to bump the current down to the point where it's not really heating up that LED too much. But I had just enough resistance in this emitter right here, and the soldering and all that, where it drew just the right amount. So I was pretty happy with that. And you can actually get more light out of a higher quality, newer Cree LED than this one right here. But I was actually pretty satisfied with that. So this is like a baby version of another kind of light, which I got down here. So I was charging. Take that off. I've probably shown this before a couple other times, but this is generally the same idea. I've just got in a little project enclosure box here. On the inside, I've got two 18650 cells in parallel, and I did that just to give me more capacity, more amp hours. A quality XML2 Cree LED. I've got another one of those little USB charge circuits down here. So that's hooked to the cells. That's how I'll recharge the batteries. And likewise, it's got the little output port also, so if I wanted to charge my cell phone off that, I can do that. And I have a driver circuit in here I got from a flashlight that basically allows me to change the brightness from high, low, and then blink. And what I also thought was really nifty, I've just got a little voltage, a little voltmeter on there, and it's actually not reading the true voltage. That's the voltage after the resistance. So I just have that through the switch here. But that just gives me an idea of how quickly the cell is running down from whichever brightness that I'm running it at. And by the way, those are really nifty. They're these little tiny voltmeters that you can get for about $2-3 a pop online, and they're just really nifty because they run from about 3 volts to 30 volts. You just hook them straight to a cell, and then it'll give you a readout of your voltage. Use it on a car battery, pretty much any kind of battery is. Except for like a AA, 1.5 volts is not enough. But I also thought this would be a little great addition to have for emergency situations, but also for people with crank lights, like this piece of crap over here I'll probably show in a minute. To DIY one of these onto your crank light output is also a good idea, I think, because it'll give you an idea of actually how much voltage you're spitting out while you're cranking, how fast you need to go, how fast you're charging your battery, etc. Yeah, this guy, it's got a another switch and a pot on here because I have yet to add a little bit more in there, but I plan on adding a radio, a couple other things that will be useful in an emergency situation. Yeah, that's another example of a light where immense brightness out of that LED, for whatever reason you may need it for. Emergency, power outage, zombie apocalypse, what the hell ever. And so moving on to more emergency type lights, this is what I thought to be a pretty decent, simple way to build a good solar light. Basically, what this is just a little dollar store Tupperware guy I got, where I threw a 6-volt solar cell on there, and I ran that 6-volt solar cell to a 1.5-volt battery, which is down in there, and that's actually a nickel metal hydride battery from what you would find from like a drill pack, cordless drill pack. And you can use any AA battery or 1.5-volt battery. I just decided I would use that because it not only can provide good current if necessary, but it's a pretty beefy cell. Shouldn't have any problems taking a continuous charge. And once it is fully charged, obviously it's got a little more capacity than your average AA or what have you. So what I did with that is I used a circuit that I showed in another video. It's a 1.5-volt boost circuit that I got from a cheap flashlight, $3 flashlight. And it's essentially just a little, it's like a jewel thief, but it's just a little boost circuit that takes this 1.2 volts from that cell and bumps it up so it can run this LED I have in there, which is another power LED I got from a bogus flashlight, which I figured this would be a good use for it. But essentially, this is a rechargeable 1.2 volt power source in there, and it's running this light. And I basically just have it on a little clicky switch here, and I like using the Tupperware because that way I don't have to make a hole. I can keep it sealed and watertight, and then just kind of squeeze this guy like that. You just squeeze the Tupperware, set your switch up right where you got, it's in there where kind of jammed in against something, and you just kind of pressure switch it. So to me, I thought that was a really useful thing because while there's a lot of solar rechargeable lights out there, I just never really could find a good combination I thought was a good idea. But something like this, which will actually run for a few hours pretty nicely off this little guy right here, which, to be honest, it doesn't need to be this bright. I just kind of wanted it to be that bright just because I'm a lunatic. But I figured, what the hell, the sun will recharge it. But essentially, like I say, this is a 6-volt cell because I got this from Radio Shack thinking it would be a lot better than it is. And while it's rated to put out 6 volts, about 450 milliamps, I believe, in bright sunlight, at the end of the day, that's probably what it's going to take to actually charge this cell. I mean, I would not try to use an 18650 to be charged with this because I honestly don't feel like it would ever happen. I could leave it out in the sun all day long, and I might be lucky if it caught half a charge. I feel like with a 1.2 volt cell, I could leave this in ambient light, and assuming it's not being blinded by constant bright sun rays, it should be just the right amount to keep that battery charged. So maybe indoors, a little bit of outdoors. Even if you left it in the blazing sunlight, all that's going to do is charge that battery faster, and I really don't see that getting damaged. If you was to leave it out in the super bright sun for weeks on end, days on end, I would imagine, yeah, something could happen to that. But as far as just casually having this thing laying around, I feel like that's a good combination, and wherever it may be, by the time you pick it up and need to use it, it's gonna be charged. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. Very simple to find a little driver circuit. Or if you wanted to, you can even make your own jewel thief circuit, your own boost circuit. But that's up to whoever. But yeah, 6-volt solar cell charging a 1.2 volt battery, running a light off a boost circuit. To me, that's the way to go. Likewise, emergency situations, your classic jewel thief is always very useful. If you got AA batteries, any kind of 1.5 volt cell, like this brightness right here is actually, it's not very bright at all, but in absolute darkness, this is actually very useful. You can read by it. You can actually navigate if it's dark enough. And that, obviously, this will run for weeks at that brightness, but if I wanted to, could bump it up to about full brightness. Honestly, don't know how long that will last, but I know this is only running at about 15 milliamps or less, which is pretty good. Classic jewel thief, always useful. So you always gotta mention the jewel thief in that type of situation. And then similarly to the jewel thief, um, I still have yet to really perfect an idea for something like this. This is just some crap I threw together. But this is just a little capacitor light where it'll just come on when I touch it. And basically, I'm just obviously just forming the resistance with my fingers. But you can see, since it's basically a joule thief circuit, so I'm sitting at less than 2 volts in the cap, or less than 2.5 volts in the cap. And let's see, it's a 4700 microfarad cap, 25 volts. But obviously, when I form the base resistance with my finger here, it'll come on a little bit, and that'll actually it'll run down to the point where it's a blink. It's actually hard to tell that it's blinking on the phone. I can see it with my eyes, but that right there is actually very usable. You can't tell because the lights are on in here, but if it was pitch black and I needed some type of super emergency light to see something that I couldn't possibly see any other way, one of these lights will actually do it. And it's pretty cool because for the amount of time that'll run right there, giving me that little very dim blinking light, all it takes is like just the slightest little flick of a hand crank charger to get that back up there. Which, and here's an example of right here. This is a monstrous looking thing that I have all taped and jacked up, that I got from a while ago, and it was a decent little hand crank light, and it's got a radio on it. But what I didn't like about it was the cell inside was basically just a piece of crap rechargeable button cell. So it was a 3-volt lithium cell, which means it could run all 3 lights before I took 2 of them out, for a decent amount of little time before it ran down. But if you're talking about running a radio and some lights off of a button cell in an emergency situation, it's not gonna work out too well for you. So I basically replaced that with a larger lithium cell that came from an e-cig. So that way, I just have much longer battery life when it is charged. And what I did with that was I basically took the dynamo and I separated that, ran it through a bridge rectifier, and have leads coming out here. And the reason I ran it through a bridge rectifier was so I could spin the crank in any direction and it'll still give me current one way. It'll still give me DC. So you see here I have my negative and my positive, obviously. Just as an example here, I've got 2 leads coming out from my cell. So let's just say if I wanted to recharge the cell in here, I just hook the leads up to it. There's obviously a neater, better way to do that, but for demonstration purposes, that's the general gist. Have a way to hook these up to your cell so it's not always connected, and then I can recharge that if I wanted to using the crank, or I can just hook these to any other peripheral or device or whatever I might need to charge through the clip leads. And that's why I say these are a good thing to have, because if you have one of these already hooked up to your dynamo output somewhere on your little crank guy, then it's just going to remain off until you start spinning the crank. And as soon as you start spinning the crank, you'll see the display come up and it'll show you how many volts you're putting out. Likewise, it'll show you how quickly you're charging whatever it is you're charging or how long it's going to take. So that's something I plan on implementing as soon as I get my hands on a little better crank device. This is actually pretty good, to be honest. It works fairly well as far as this little crank is concerned. Can't really tell you who made it, but I will definitely get another one of those cranks. And then also, by the way, I guess here's a little champion super jewel ringer circuit. I'm not really sure how to implement this into something more usable yet, but I just kind of leave it like this as it is. But this is just an example of a little light that'll just keep going strong for so long. Put about 9 volts in there, just let it go, and that'll just go for just hours and hours. It's crazy. As far as practical use out of that, though, couldn't tell you a whole lot. Oh. And then lastly, I don't know why I'm throwing this in there, but I thought this was a good idea. I've got a very powerful flashlight here. This is a 1,000 lumen light, and I just had a little convex lens that I had laying around, and it happened to fit around the head perfectly. And I threw it on there, and I wanted to see, could you start a fire with a 1,000 lumen flashlight and a lens right on it? And I think you could. Just to show an example, this is probably going to be really bright, but I'm going to focus the brightest point on this table here. And when I do that, it doesn't take long before smoke starts coming out. I don't know if you can see that smoke, but I'm burning the table pretty good right there. And I was a good inch away from it. You can see little burn melt marks there. This is just a little 1,000 lumen flashlight using a little cell with a lens on it. And it is possible to actually start. If I had tinder or maybe tissue or something, the right material, I could probably start a fire with this thing in an emergency situation. Of course, likewise, I've got small Tesla coils that you could also start a fire with the plasma with, I suppose. Yeah, these are just what I thought was decent little ideas for emergency lights. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out over the years the most practical, best ways to go about these little guys, and I don't know. To me, I think these are some good ones. All right, thanks for watching.